Welcome to another episode of Well-Adjusted Mama. This is a podcast dedicated to educating and empowering women from preconception, pregnancy, birth, and through early motherhood on wellness lifestyle. I'm your host, Dr. Laura Brayton. I'm a maternity pediatric chiropractor, functional medicine practitioner, and mother who has hand-selected experts in natural holistic healthcare specialties to shine light on options and choices during this exciting phase of a woman's life. And today's episode is about the 10 rules for raising kids in a high-tech world with my special guest, Dr. Jean Twenge. Jean Twenge, PhD, is a professor of psychology at San Diego State University, and she's the author of more than 190 scientific publications and several books based on her research, including 10 Rules for Raising Kids in a High-Tech World, Generations, iGen, and Generation Me. Her research has been covered in Time, The Atlantic, Newsweek, The New York Times, USA Today, and The Washington Post. She's been featured on Today, Good Morning America, Fox and Friends, CBS This Morning, Real Time with Bill Maher, Meet the Press, and NPR. She lives in San Diego with her husband and 3 daughters. Please visit her at Jean Twenge, that's TWENGE.com, or at X at Jean_Twenge. Hi, Dr. Twenge. I'm so happy to have you on the show today.
Thanks for having me.
So today we're talking about a very important topic, 10 Rules for Raising Kids in a High-Tech World. Your book comes out September 2nd. And I think this is such a relevant and important issue for a lot of parents listening to the podcast, especially ones that have babies or even haven't even given birth yet, right? But know that this is something that people are talking about. It's getting a lot of coverage, and they're really wanting to learn from the parents ahead of them who made mistakes and course correct.
Absolutely. I mean, I think this is one of those things where preparing way ahead of time is a great idea. Then you don't have to backtrack. So to have a plan, even if you have babies or toddlers, if you have a plan for when you're going to give your kid their first smartphone, then you're prepared when they start asking for it, which happens younger and younger these days.
Yeah, 100%. So I would love for you to just share with the audience, why you felt compelled to write this book. I read your book and you speak a lot about your own personal experiences and all the research. So if you want to just delve into that a little bit, that'd be great.
Yeah, so I've done research on social media and mental health and adolescent mental health trends for about a decade now. And that was really my start into thinking more about technology and kids, was seeing the really disturbing increase in depression mostly among teens, but there's also data for kids as young as 10 that more are self-harming and more are depressed. So this is a really big problem. And I became more and more convinced over the years that it had at least something to do with smartphones and social media, because teens were spending more time online, less time with their friends in person, and less time sleeping. And that's a really terrible formula for mental health. It's not great for kids either, or for toddlers, for example, who might be on iPads a lot. And, just for a quick thing to reassure everybody, I'm not talking about an hour or so you can take a shower or cook dinner. I mean, like the kid I saw the other day who had an iPad around his neck, where it's just like that real attachment, or anytime you go out in public with your kid, that iPad is there. You really got to wonder what the effects of that are going to be long term.
Oh yeah. I mean, I've seen it. It's kind of used like a pacifier, right? For that toddler, so that they're quiet, right, when they're in public.
Right. And, and I get that urge. So I have 3 kids myself. They're older now. They're 18, 15, and 13. But I very well remember those days of, going to a restaurant or taking kids on trips and so on, where, you really are concerned about not having them scream their lungs out and have everybody be like, whoa, who's doing that? Whose kid is that? But yeah, if your kid's got that iPad all the time, they won't learn how to be in that situation, and they won't learn how to self-regulate. And I do sometimes say, on airplanes, all bets are off, but in restaurants and museums and, any other kind of public situation or grandma's house, that's a time when even a 2-year-old should be interacting with the world around them and not staring at a screen. So, I saw this a little bit when my kids were young. The iPad had kind of just been introduced. But of course, with all the pressures around kids getting smartphones in 3rd grade sometimes, 5th graders on TikTok, all of this stuff happens much younger than it used to.
Yeah, and it's scary. So in my neighborhood, there was a lot of talk about the Anxious Generation book, and the elementary school parents are like, we want to course correct for our community and change like what's been happening, because we have this information that unfortunately parents even 10 years ago didn't have and didn't know. Mm-hmm. Right. And so it's interesting because parents that have younger kids that were like incoming kindergarten with my son, a year ago, or younger kids, we were like, this is easy for us to do as a community. But people that had a kindergartner and a high school student and middle school student was like, this is not so easy for me. I mean, they can still obviously make a different choice for that younger child. But we see that can happen where it's like, oh, well, my sister got her, smartphone at this age and got, social media at this age. Why can't I? Right? That's not fair. And it's like, well, as a parent, we know better. We want to do better. So, do you have any advice to parents that have children that are spanning kind of this different gap here and had different rules for different children?
Yeah. So one thing that I hear a lot, especially if I talk to the parents of high school students or even middle school students, is, oh, you can't put the genie back in the bottle. I've already given them a smartphone. Of course you can. You can.
You're the parent.
Yeah, you're the parent. You can put the genie back in the bottle. So depends on the age of the kid we're talking about. So that in the book, in 10 rules, one of the rules is that you give your first smartphone, internet-enabled phone, at 16, usually with the driver's license. Or if you're in a big city, when they're 16, they can make their way around the city by themselves on public transportation. So that's a lot later than most kids get their phones these days. So if we're talking about, okay, you've given your 12-year-old a smartphone, well, take it back and give them an alternative. So one of the other rules is first phone should be basic phones. So I think some people get the impression, especially if they've read The Anxious Generation, that, oh, the choice is smartphone versus flip phone. That's not the choice these days. There's all kinds of phones out there designed for kids. And I do think you have to put off giving your kid even one of those. Even 8-year-olds probably shouldn't have one of those. But by the time they're in middle school or 12 or 13, the standard is going to be texting your friends. It's really hard to do on a flip phone. It can be done pretty easily on one of these phones that are built on a Samsung, usually, platform, but they have no internet and no social media. So a couple examples of those are Pinwheel, Gab, Bark, TrueMe. Or if you want to, get one of these for an older kid where it needs to look cool, there's one called a Light Phone that a lot of adults use as well. But what they have in common is no social media. And most of them, it's also no internet browser. So they can text their friends. As a parent, you can approve or disapprove, whether they have games on it. And they can have other kind of apps, but no social media, usually no internet browser. And that's really, really key.
And then they can call as well.
And they can call, absolutely. So they can call and text you, which is very often how parents end up in this trap in the first place. Of, I want my kid to be safe, so I'm going to give them the phone. And then they end up unsafe because of social media, because of being on that phone constantly. And we can get into all the dangers, that can happen on social media, but let's just say it was not designed for kids. And what are the other rules? No social media until 16 or later.
Yeah, what I learned when I read The Anxious Generation was that was originally, Congress wanted to pass a rule that was prohibiting social media for 16 and up. And that was going to be a federal law. And it got blocked and they lowered it to 13. And then, as you shared in your book, nobody's even enforcing that 13-year-old age limit. But I agree. 16 is, to me, a no-brainer. But I have, teens and tweens in my office here that are on social media all the time. And that's just so what if you have a teen or tween that already has a social media account? Maybe they are over 13. So legally that's allowed, but you're like, oh, I know this is really bad for my child's mental health. Can you take away the social media too?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can. You're the parent, that you bought that smartphone, you pay the bill. Now, look, it does have to be something where you're going to talk to your kid about why you're doing this, but you can absolutely still do that. So let's talk about that 13 age minimum. So as you said, it's not enforced. So it's routine for 10 and 11-year-olds to be on TikTok because they don't enforce that 13 minimum, and Instagram too, and Snapchat. And that 13 minimum, you're right, compromise with the tech companies back in 1998 before, social media even really existed in its current form. So here's the thing, like what parent or developmental expert or educator ever said 13, middle school, right smack dab with puberty, that's the best time to introduce social media? Like no one would ever argue that. You could argue it's the worst time. So it does make sense to wait until you get beyond that first year of high school, closer to getting that driver's license, all that stuff, to wait until 16. So let's say you have a 13-year-old who has Snapchat, for example, and they have it on a smartphone or on a laptop. Use parental controls to block it. And Snapchat's an especially interesting example because I think a lot of parents and a lot of kids are like, oh, but that's just fun and it's just a camera or it's just something I'm going to communicate with my friends. I think a lot of people don't realize the dangers that Snapchat can get kids into, like it's the favorite app of drug dealers. And there's a big lawsuit right now against Snapchat from families where their teens died from drug overdoses and they got the drugs, and in many cases were advertised drug dealers on Snapchat.
Oh my God, that is crazy. I mean, even this morning I was telling a mom about this interview, and she has 3 children, and she's like, oh yeah, my daughter is on Snapchat. I don't know anything about Snapchat. I'm a Gen Zer. She's like, yeah, my daughter asked for it because that's how her friends are communicating. Mm-hmm. They're not even texting each other. Mm-hmm. They're Snapchatting, and I guess there was parties or party invites and things that were sent through Snapchat. So her daughter was missing out. And from what I learned from your book, in that case, the mom could have a Snapchat account and receive, I guess, the invite, right? And manage it. But she told me she's just on there reading all of the messages and she's policing it that way. But that sounds like so much work and very exhausting.
Yeah, it is. And, I think that is a possible solution, but yeah, it's a time sink. The other solution is for your kids to have that conversation with their friends they can throw you as the parent under the bus, because why not? They can say, hey, my mom, she's really mean. She won't let me have Snapchat. And I want to find out what you're doing. So can we do that on text instead? Because I'm allowed to have that. And sometimes I even joke about this in the book, like, all kids know that parents are lame, and that they may have these rules and so on. And why not, just kids can have that conversation. I was talking to my 18-year-old the other day. So because she was our first, we were still kind of learning, how this went. And she actually had a flip phone until she was 16 and a half. It became impractical when she started driving. So that's when she got the smartphone. That's how I developed that rule of get your first smartphone when you get your driver's license. But she said something to me that was really striking. She said, I think that kids need to have that conversation with their friends, and anybody who will exclude you for not having social media is not really your friend.
Well said. It's true. I mean, if we're talking like a small group of girls that at school in your class, why can't they communicate in a different way? And if they're not willing to, make that effort, then it does really speak volumes about the friendship, which is painful, right? Especially when you're going through puberty.
For sure.
Everybody wants to fit in. Everybody wants to be liked. But these are really important life lessons, I think, for all of us to, teach our kids. So we went through a few of the rules. Did you want to go through a few other rules that are part of the book?
Well, yeah, I mean, I definitely want to talk about 2 in particular. So one is what I think is the most important rule of no phones in the bedroom overnight.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and that to me seems so easy to implement.
Relatively speaking, compared to everything else, it is. And that's one of the reasons I think it's if you're going to follow only one, follow that one. So I've seen some people, including, an article just recently that talked about you shouldn't have devices in the bedroom at all. And for younger kids, I think that's actually a great idea. It's really hard once they get to middle school and they're doing homework on laptops. And then, they don't want to be in the living room because everybody's making noise and it's distracting. And, I get that. That's why you need to have parental controls on the laptop. That's a whole other thing. But after bedtime and within about a half an hour of bedtime, there's just so many studies on this. And, scrolling or using devices in bed right before you go to sleep is especially bad for kids getting enough sleep. There's a ton of studies on that. And even worse is having that device in the bedroom. And, a really large percentage of even 11 and 12-year-olds have their phone or iPad in the room overnight, and then they wake up. A large percentage of them wake up at least once a week, if not more, overnight, like at 2 a.m., to answer texts or look at social media. It's mind-blowing, but that is the reality right now, because I think it's kind of taken for granted. I'm going to have that phone, everywhere I go, including in the bedroom overnight. And it's just so bad for sleep. And sleep is so important for mental and physical health.
100%. So this is just basic sleep hygiene. I mean, I personally also don't like sleeping with my phone in my bedroom.
Yeah,
and
it's for adults too. It's for parents too. Absolutely.
So this is good modeling for parents to be like, we all need a break from screen time. You mentioned at least a half hour before bedtime. And then you also mentioned about blue light blocking glasses, because that can also impact our melatonin and our ability to fall asleep. And, what I learned was that, kids need, 11 hours when they're like elementary age, and then I guess a little bit less when they're teens, but not much less.
Yeah, about 9 hours even for high school students.
So 9 to 11 hours depending on the age of the child. I was like, oh my God, my son who's almost 8 was getting like 10 and a half. And I was like, okay, let's encourage this and make an effort to do the 11 hours. Like, this is really important for growth and development. And like you mentioned, their mental well-being as well.
Yeah, I think it is not commonly known, especially that teens need more sleep than adults do. And yeah, especially even younger middle schoolers, the 11-year-olds still need, 9.5 or 10. And we really have to try to preserve that time. And it can be tough with early school start times. So my youngest is 13 and she has to be on a bus before 7 to make it to middle school. And that's hard. So that further complicates things in terms of trying to make sure that your kids get enough sleep.
Yeah. But I think with that information, there's that empowerment to just make it a priority. For us, it just means like, okay, we just have to head upstairs a half hour earlier to brush teeth and read books, because I don't want to cut that out. We just got to get that bedtime routine going earlier. And that's important. So that's your number one rule. What's another rule that you wanted to talk about?
Yeah. So another one is rule number 8 is give your kids real world freedom. So, especially by the time they get to about 8, that's when, say, a lot of Gen X and even, some older millennial parents remember that by 8 or 9, they had the freedom to walk to school, to ride around with their friends on their bikes, to go into a store and buy something by yourself, or at the very least, when you're shopping with mom or dad, maybe go get an item a couple aisles down. And that's just not as common anymore. And so kids are missing out on that. And there's like just so many different factors about why that's important. First, just having that independence really helps with anxiety, because then they're not scared to do it anymore. Once they get to middle school or high school, if they don't have those experiences, then what happens when they go to college? And what are they going to do then? Call mom for everything? And a lot of them do, from what I hear visiting college campuses. That's calling or texting mom for every little problem is really, really common. It's just really essential for success in high school and college. So to try to get your kids that independence is really important. And it's here in a book on mostly on technology use, because what are kids going to do if they're not on that iPad and if they don't have that smartphone and they're not on social media? Well, we got to find ways for them to be in the real world with their friends in person, having those other types of experiences that are so important for them. So I go through in the book, there's 2 sections. One is for 13 and older, and then 12 and under, in terms of things where you can try to get your kids that freedom. So starting, say, at 8, or even a little younger, hey, we need mac and cheese. It's a couple aisles down. Why don't you go get it and then come back and meet me? And then eventually by 9 or 10, hey, here's the credit card. Go buy stuff at Target or at the grocery store, and then come back to me. And that's one of those things as a parent where you're like, wait, can I really do this? Yeah, you can do this. And that used to be very normal for kids to have that kind of freedom. And then when they do it, they know they can do it again. Then the anxiety is gone. The best cure for anxiety is experience.
So, as you're saying this, I'm just getting like a flashback to Home Alone when Kevin is left at the house by himself. And I think he's like 7, 8 years old, and he's afraid of everything, so anxiety. And then he like had to go to the store and, grocery shop and do laundry and like do things around the house. Yeah. And it completely changed him as a independent young person who had confidence in his ability to do it because he did it. Yep. You were saying if something's like afraid for your child, like the only way to get over that is to do it, like, and be like, oh, I can do it.
Yeah. And stuff around the house is a great place to start, especially with younger kids. Toddlers and preschoolers naturally want to help. And sometimes as moms, we're just going to mess it up, but you got to put that aside and have them help because they will get better and better at it. And if they are, helping you cook or sweeping alongside you or doing those things, then you're catching them at the right time for them to be part of the family. And I think you still, you can retrofit this, for older kids. I realized I had to do it because I have 3 kids, and like my oldest learned how to cook fairly early. My middle one just for whatever reason, like wasn't interested. But then I said, hey, every other week, you're on a weekend night, you're going to cook dinner. You're going to trade off with your younger sister. And she was very reluctant. My 13-year-old was pretty okay with it. But yeah, I had to fight with the 15-year-old about it. But she did great. She cooks a really, really mean salmon and learned how to cook it. Fish is hard to cook, right? You have to get it kind of to the right level. And she did it. She did a great job. Now she knows how to do that. She's not scared of it. And she'll have that skill going forward. Plus, then I didn't have to cook dinner. It's fantastic, And there are 10-year-olds out there who can do that if you start them young, who can cook a whole dinner, And you can start them on the easy stuff, when they're like your son's age, like 8. Hey, we're having frozen pizza tonight. Follow the directions in the box and put it in. And they really rise to the occasion with those types of responsibilities.
I think that's so important. I think there is so much of this coddling that happens, and I even have to catch myself with my son because he likes it. He likes being coddled. You know what I mean? He's like, you can take care of me for the rest of my life, but that doesn't serve any of us, right? Like exactly. He has to grow up and become an independent man. Yeah. And I think for some moms, that is hard to let go. And I even see it with certain personalities where they're like, well, if I do it, it's going to get done faster, better, right? They don't want to let their spouses help, right? And
I get like, that.
Because they're like, I am Superwoman and I can do it all and I can do it the best. And then they're burnt out, they're overwhelmed, they're exhausted, and their self-care is in the toilet. So do you have any advice to those moms about letting go of controlling, doing it all because they're the only ones that can do it right?
Yeah. I have some of those tendencies myself, but I'm also very busy at work and with 3 kids. So it's also been one of those things where I'm like, okay, they may not do it the same way that I do it, but especially with the kids, I'm like, then they're going to learn how to do it. Laundry is a really great example. I mean, kids can do their laundry starting at 9 or 10, easy. And I have admittedly found then you have to sometimes nag them to take it out of the washer and take it out of and honestly, and I'm and I am honest about this in the book. No parent is perfect. I have not done this perfectly. If I had to do this again, I would have had some kind of consequence for it being left in the washer or figured something out so I didn't have to nag them about it. But at least I wasn't doing their laundry anymore. And they did learn how to put it away and, do all that kind of stuff. And I didn't have to do it because that was, in the divvying up between spouses, the laundry was in my category because I hate doing dishes and I hate cleaning up. And so my husband does most of that. But I got laundry, and once we didn't have a full-time babysitter anymore, that was a lot of the weekend. And so when my kids are old enough, giving them that task to do themselves took a lot off my plate. It was really, really, really helpful because even a little bit of nagging took a lot less time than doing the laundry myself. I think it's so useful for them to learn that skill. Again, a lot of kids go to college and they don't know how to do their own laundry.
Yeah, that's crazy to me.
Yeah, it's really crazy. Well, my even older than that, sometimes mom still does her laundry, which kind of blows my mind. My oldest, who's 18, is in the Navy Reserves, so she actually just got home from doing her boot camp and then training, and she wrote me a letter in boot camp, which I think I have to frame, which she said, Mom, I see so many other young people here who never really learned independence, who never did their own laundry, and they are having a really hard time here. And she said, Mom, thank you for raising me to be an adult. I'm like, seriously, that was like the coolest thing I've ever heard.
Yeah. I mean, that is our job as parents.
That's
and
right.
It's a hard job.
It is.
And I think there is that balance of like, you want to, have your child have the best childhood experience. And sometimes we conflict like, oh, if they're doing all these chores, then they can't be playing as much, right? And enjoying their childhood. But they do, at a certain age, have to learn these real world skills, and it will support them the rest of their life.
Yeah. And there's, you take a 4 or 5-year-old, there's really clear benefits. They like to help at that age, and they're contributing to the family. And it can really help their behavior if not everything is child centered. They're learning how to work as part of a family, as part of a team. So it gets a message across without even saying it verbally.
Yeah, it's so important. I have a question here that I think is really relevant for the pregnant and new moms that are breastfeeding. And if they're like middle of the night breastfeeding their baby, scrolling social media, how is that potentially impacting their child's development in utero as a newborn breastfeeding? The mother is disconnected from their child. She's got the blue light. Can you share anything about that?
I would be most concerned with the blue light part, both for mom getting back to sleep and maybe for baby getting exposed to some of that blue light in terms of the melatonin production. I remember having newborns, and sometimes you bring them home from the hospital and they're flipped, like they want to be up all night and sleep all day. And you really got to get that melatonin production and that circadian rhythm locked in. And I would be afraid that the light from the phone might interfere with that, especially if it's shining into baby's eyes. And then same for mom getting back to sleep, at 2 a.m. when you're doing that middle of the night feeding. So I breastfed all 3 of my kids, and by my second one, right after my second one was born, I got a Kindle. However, that was not backlit, so it didn't have blue light. And I didn't use it in the middle of the night for the feedings. For that, I would basically just stare into space and think about going back to sleep, which I found helpful. But then during the day, breastfeeding takes a lot of time. It's nice to do something else. Then it's not as problematic to be on your phone or reading. But I did really like the Kindle because it was not backlit, and you can only really do one thing, which is read books. So it's not quite as engaging. You're not flipping between tasks as often,
and you're not scrolling.
You're not scrolling. You may be turning the page, but and it's just it's something that you can easily put away. And then if you need to switch baby to the other side, or they're having trouble, they're crying or whatever. It's it's more easily put aside than the phone or social media or things like that.
Yeah, and I think there is maybe a little disconnect with bonding with your child too, because your brain is elsewhere. You're not with your baby. And especially, even a new baby's wanting to have eye contact while they're up on mom's chest, right? Yeah. So if mom's looking somewhere else, then that, kind of, I don't know. I don't know if there's any studies yet that have been done around that and how that impacts, an infant's brain, but
I don't know either. I mean, and I can share that even though I did like reading that Kindle, I remember distinctly, particularly for my last 2, when I weaned them, I put the Kindle away so I could focus on that experience, the last few weeks.
Oh, because you knew that the breastfeeding relationship was ending. Yeah, and it is so finite. I mean, especially that first year of life. And they grow up quick, right?
Exactly.
Oh, my goodness. Well, Jane, do you have any last thoughts you want to share with the audience?
So there's a couple of phrases I come back to in the book a few times. So one we touched on earlier. Someone told me when my kids were really little, and this stuck with me ever since, you're not raising children, you're raising adults. That you have to think long term. That you want your kids happy in the short term, but sometimes you need to think more long term about what's going to make them happy in the long term. And that's often not going to be more technology, and it's not going to be giving them a smartphone at 10. And it's not going to be letting them on social media at 13. It's going to be saying no to those things, letting them have a childhood, and giving them that independence so then they can become an independent adult. The other thing I come back to a lot is the phrase, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And what that means is you're not going to be perfect, and they're not going to do their laundry perfectly. And, you're maybe not going to be able to follow every rule every second of every day, but anything that you can do to preserve that time of childhood, early adolescence, and protect it from social media, over-reliance on screens, all of that stuff will be very, very useful and will pay off dividends.
I love that. Well said. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Well, I hope you enjoyed today's episode with Jean, and it was so enlightening and empowering. Her book is fantastic. I read it cover to cover. I highly recommend you check it out. The 10 Rules for Raising Kids in a High-Tech World. It's really an easy way for parents to understand not only the concerns about technology, but to really feel empowered about what to do about it with these 10 simple rules. And, like she said, you just implement whatever resonates with your family, your lifestyle, and your community. But it's so good to have this awareness and to really make these decisions consciously, along with the discussion in your community about what is the best way to parent our children and raise them in the world that we live in. So definitely check out her book. And for more information, you can also visit her website at jeantwenge.com. That's JeanTweng.com.